So we're going to get the meeting underway shortly. All right, committee members, call the meeting to order. Look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we'll move right into the business. So item 3, introduction of new items and new business. I know we have 2 items. One which was something I'm bringing forward related to public input and open mic opportunity for members of the public. We'll deal with that at number 15, but look for a motion to accept that as new business. So moved by I'm at Council Chambers. Moved by Vanessa, seconded by Susan Topp. All those in favor? And the motion carries. Now, the other new business item that we have, which will be discussed after the Black Student Association delegation, which is brought forward by member Vanessa. So if you want to just introduce that.
Sure. We'd like to add to the agenda a delegation from the Indigenous community represented by Leslie White-Eye.
So happy to second that if you're moving it. So look for any discussion. Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor? And the motion carries unanimously. So we'll deal with that right after a Black Student Association delegation. All right. So now, sorry, go ahead.
Chair Salee, just wanted to add just a very quick item, which is just a very, very brief update on the sexual assault investigation policy review. It should be very quick.
Great, so I'll happy to second that. And any question? And we'll call the question. All those in favor? And the motion carries. So thank you all for coming to the February Black History Month. Happy Black History Month. We have quite a heavy agenda, so we'll try to get through it all. This is my first time chairing this meeting, so bear with me as I get into the minutia of the police board pieces. So I know shortly the Black Student Association from Western will be giving us a delegation, but before we get into that, just wanted to acknowledge Black History Month. London has actually a very deep and rich history when it comes to Black history. In particular, the London Police even has its own history. In particular with Louis Corey. As you guys are aware, there's an award for that, and the event will come up February, I'll just look to the chief to confirm, it's February 23rd. Yeah. Perfect, and at the event we recognize Black History, I'm just taking the expert from the website, where they recognize Black History Month annually each February by hosting Louis Corey Trailblazer Award for youth. Sergeant Louis Corey was the first Black officer hired by our service. The Trailblazer Award was created to offer incentives and opportunities for growth and success among young youth from the African, Caribbean, and Black Canadian communities. So that's going to be a great event. I'll be there as well, and I'm sure other board members. I did also want to take this time to recognize at the Black History of opening ceremony, the mayor was there, the chief was there as well, but the police also had their own booth. Constable Pierre Mohammed was there, and Teresa wasn't there, but she was part of the organizing committee is on the organizing committee with the London Black History Steering Committee. So many titles, just trying to mention that. As well, half of the board members here had the opportunity to attend Robin Maynard, who's a community activist known across Canada. I know Jeanette was there, Vanessa and Councillor Helmer were there at that event, and it was a well-attended event, so I just wanted to recognize that as well. So I believe our delegates are going to be setting up shortly here. If they just come up to the screen here, and our staff from Technology Services will help them set up. But I did want us to just formally, as a board, acknowledge Black History Month, so I'll ask Susan Toff just to take the chair so I can just move that motion.
Happy to take over as chair.
Thank you. So I'll just move a motion that the London Police Service Board recognize Black History Month.
And we have Member Ampton Smith seconding that. Any questions? No? All in favor? Great. Any opposed? Seeing none, carried.
Perfect. So and thank you, Vice Chair. So as the Black Student Association gets set up, I just wanted to thank them for making the time to come here. I know it's exam mode, right? Yep, so they're a little stressed and they're running and they got to get out of here pretty soon. But it's exciting to have the Black Student Association. I've attended their events at Western in the past, their reflection events, and they've at times weighed in on city issues. I know when we were talking about changing the name of our advisory committee, I attended that event and I brought at the time, the advisory chair to hear feedback from you guys, and you guys didn't hold back, and it really did help shape, and now we have a new name for the organization, as well as you guys have at times weighed in with us on different issues. So you guys bring a unique lens and an important lens, and I'm thankful that you guys are here today. So we'll get into that shortly. I guess while we're waiting, I'll just fill up some time and just talk a little bit about myself. No, I'm just joking. The Black Student Association of Western, for those who aren't familiar, it's a club on campus. The students come from all over, whether they're from the Caribbean, from Africa, I've been told, some people from Toronto. So it's really great to have these international students, local students, and people from across Canada here in our community, and they really give us a wealth of knowledge, and it's always nice to ask them, and I'm humbled that they took up our invitation to come here before us today. You gotta love technology.
We have like a little PowerPoint. I think some of the fonts are off, so some of the fonts are off, so bear with us. But essentially, we want to start this with thanking Mo and the whole team for giving us the opportunity to actually come here and speak on, I guess, issues that are specific to us and to the London community as a whole. So overall, how we want to kind of structure this is we want to get into a little about the interactions we've had and we face with the London police, and then kind of get into what we see the future looks like in terms of our relationship with the police and with campus as a whole. So starting, a lot of us, all three of us are from Toronto, and a lot of our members are not from London specifically. So a lot of their interactions with the police are very rare for a lot of people, so they don't often see the police. So the number one thing our members mentioned when we kind of brought up this and we posted was, I guess, the incident that just happened in the previous month with the officer that was all over the news, and it was I guess the blackface piece. And I guess this wasn't so much of a critique on the police's structure or what they're doing, but more so on us feeling comfortable in the space. So a lot of our members, what their piece was, every time we go out for Halloween, we see this happening in London every single Halloween. We've all, when we see this in the news from an officer, and you don't have regular interactions with the officer other than homecoming, it kind of just sets a bad, I guess, relationship, right? And this is kind of why we wanted more interactions and more structured interactions. And we kind of will get into that later. But well, to start, we had the kind of two testimonials that we wanted to highlight on experiences and behaviors that we've kind of noticed, like from our members, a kind of a trend. But specifically, the first one being the reporting to London police. So I know London police is different than the campus police that we have, but often I feel like that relationship needs to be examined, because a lot of our students, any interactions they do have with campus police is through campus police, right? So some students came up to us, specifically this one student who was mentioning how he had a complaint and he wanted to go through campus police to actually do this. And then it was very difficult to actually go through campus police and then go to London police. And then when he was at various stages, he felt like he wasn't being taken seriously at every stage, right? So this I guess this is a problem with just policing in common. It's kind of hard to standardize it, but I also feel like London police relationship to the actual police, I guess, needs to be examined and needs to see how that reflects on us. And then our second testimonial, I guess Tevin can talk to it. You want to talk? Yeah, go ahead. I'll hold it.
Hello, everyone. Again, I just want to say thank you for allowing us to be here and sharing some of our experiences. Yeah, so the second testimonial of mine is pretty much just us interacting with the police when we're downtown, when, say, if we go out just to have a, casual drink with our friends, Me personally, whenever I go out, I'm not a heavy drinker, but, I go out and for some reason, after I leave the club, after having sometimes a hard time with bouncers, I have to deal with police officers who, I'm just waiting for my Uber, but for some reason they want to question you. Just for me personally, I think it might be because the way that I look. Doing no harm to anyone. Again, just waiting for an Uber, waiting for a ride home, waiting for the Mustang Express to get home, and somebody has questions regarding where am I going? Did this happen? Did you see anybody doing anything? Certain questions that kind of allow me to believe I'm in the wrong when I did nothing wrong, when I was just out with my friends like everyone else here, but they didn't question somebody who standing right beside me who is of a different race. Again, after a long night, you already deal with bouncers harassing you, being physical with you sometimes for no reason. So it's just interactions like that where it makes you question, okay, am I safe here? Am I comfortable here? And so on. So, yeah.
So yeah, just to kind of reiterate, I feel like because our interaction with London police are minimal, and we already come with, I guess, baggage from policing interactions from where we come from, which has nothing to do with London police. I guess the instances that you do interact with London police end up being, I guess, magnified, right? They end up being more, they create your view more, they're more important interaction by interaction than it is for when you go home and you've had a whole life of interaction with the police, which is why we think these seemingly small things make you feel uncomfortable, and they kind of feed into each other, right? If you're harassed at the bar, then you're less likely to report things, and when you're harassed there, you're less likely to be inducive to policing. So in terms of because we only have a few minutes, what we would like to see moving forward, I kind of just brought Danielle to kind of explain our reflection piece and explain what we wanted to have in terms of having an open forum.
Hi, everyone. Again, I just want to thank you guys for giving us this opportunity. So basically, as Zach just mentioned, we have reflections where we basically speak on issues that affect the Black community at Western and also in London as well. So many people suggested that maybe the London police could come into one of our reflections throughout once throughout the year, where we basically speak on relationships between the students and the police, or people who just live in London, and then you'll be able to hear other people's experiences and just not ours, because as we said, we don't necessarily live in London all the time. Also, someone else suggested that we have open forum with students across campus. That way you'll also be able to get more experiences and figure out more ways in which you guys could improve in London. And I personally feel like this would be a great opportunity for you guys, because hearing one person's experience isn't enough, or two or three people's, because there's a lot of people who maybe just don't know how to reach out to you guys and, express how they feel. So maybe if you guys came to our reflection without a uniform and more casual and dressed down so they feel more comfortable, that way they'll be able to speak to you guys and you'll be able to get more information. So, yeah.
Yeah, so just to sum it up, we think there's a missing link in terms of our relationship with the police. I feel like in terms of city council, we have Mo coming to a lot of our reflections and interaction with us at our opening ceremonies. I know Matt Brown came to one of our reflections last year, and it's seemingly a small thing to do, but a lot of times you just feel validated in, the mayor's at your reflection, what you have to say is more important. And because we don't interact with the police, we feel like forming these relationships and having open forums with students and actually discussing what policing looks like for us, and how a more community based approach could look like would be super valuable. Because even for campus as a whole, I feel like campus police only come knocking on your door because your party is too loud, right? It's not there. There's no real like community policing going on, I feel like, for a lot of the Western students, and specifically for students like us who come with a lot of baggage in terms of policing. I feel like there's a big opportunity to form a relationship on our own terms with the police and to better our relationship as a whole with the City of London. So with that, I would just kind of want to conclude our presentation. Thank you guys for listening to us so much. And feel free to reach out. We do have a lot more to discuss on this topic, but of course we only have 5 to 10 minutes, so we try to condense it. And thank you, Mo.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It was really great. I did want to ask you, are you comfortable still with taking a couple questions if there are questions from the board?
Of course.
So I'll just look around in the board to see if there's any questions at this time for the delegation. Oh, Susan?
Just a quick question. Would, in terms of expectations from the board and board members, do you see opportunities there as well in terms of coming out to your events? And I know certainly we already have some members here, but is that also part of, as I know you're talking, obviously, building relationships with the service, but with board members as well? AKA, please invite me to your events.
I feel like that's what we want to do, right? We had at our policing back live, I remember Vanessa was there, and she kind of spoke too. So it was, I feel like that's also what we want. Like we kind of focus on police because we don't have that relationship so far. But having community people at our events, I feel like is very different than other clubs because we want to interact with London as a whole and we want to build that relationship. So definitely 100%.
I know sometimes, and this question gets asked in the community, and sometimes this might be the reason why, and I don't want to speak for anyone, but sometimes in the past why police haven't shown up to events because sometimes they're told don't come, and there's sometimes those barriers. So I guess they're always waiting for that invitation, it seems like, because that's important because they don't want to just impose or just show up and not be really, asked to come. But it seems like that this is a different approach here. So I just wondered if you could maybe touch on that for clarification.
Yeah, so we kind of wrestled with that too. Obviously, a lot of people in the community are like, oh, we don't want police at all. And then a lot of people are like, oh, we'd be very interested in having police at our reflections. But we feel like there's like a happy medium in terms of if we want police presence all the time, we have to build a relationship with the police, and we don't have that currently. So to start that relationship, we're looking for reflections and open forums. So it's a discussion about police, which is very appropriate for them to be there. And then that can further develop into sponsorships, promotions, like actually having events, right? And having a two-way relationship with the police. But to start, we feel like this is super foundational in having a large discussion about policing, what we like, what we don't like, and what we can do moving forward.
Perfect. Just look to any other board members. Great. So I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for coming in, and thanks for coming again, and good luck on your exams, and enjoy your reading week.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
So board members, the next item will be we'll have the Indigenous community delegation coming up shortly. Hello and welcome.
Okay. Thanks everyone for hearing me today. I'm here to talk about an event that occurred in London on Monday. And it's the reason I'm here is because I think there are some lessons learned that we can take from the event that occurred on Monday, and that there was some real feelings of tension that were caused as a result of an event that occurred on Monday. And so just to give you some context, first of all, I'm Leslie White-Eye. I'm the former chief of Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, but I'm also actively involved in community development activities and do work within the community, and this is how you find me here today. So I was present at the event. On Monday, a bunch of organizers coordinated a march to show support for the Bushi family, Colton Bushi, and in particular to show solidarity in terms of how we were not happy with the verdict of not guilty in the trial for Gerald Stanley in Saskatchewan. And so the coordinators, I thought, did an incredible job on Monday in the lead up to Monday's event in terms of how they promoted the event and how they expressed right off the hop how important it was that everyone remain peaceful, and that the intent there was merely to show and express their voices in response to the verdict. And that I thought the coordinators did an incredible job every day leading up to the day of the event through a Facebook page event to express how important it was that this was definitely going to be a place for us to express our, I guess, our unity in terms of how we were feeling about the verdict in a way that I think is quite acceptable in Canada, and that is through a rally or a march. And so the event was organized for people to meet at Victoria Park at 1 o'clock, and for the participants then to walk to the courthouse on Monday. And so those events did occur, and I thought the coordinators did an incredible job, even I think a couple hours before the event, putting up a live broadcast of how important it was that our voices be heard, but also that our voices be expressed in a way that maintains civility and calm in the matter. Which given the content and the topic and the various ways that this particular verdict has gone in the media, it shows much restraint, I think, on behalf of many who feel strongly about, generally about systemic challenges that Indigenous people face in Canada within the justice system. And so I just want to acknowledge, first of all, the leadership there. So the particular event that I want to come to you about is when we approached the courthouse, everyone ended up walking up onto the larger kind of patio entrance area off of, it's not Talbot, is it Queen? Is it Queen? Yeah, Queen. So everyone kind of, as we were walking from the street onto the courthouse, there was this large, huge cement patio there. You walk up in the stairs and there's this larger kind of area for people to gather. And so that's where we ended up stopping the march. And so people were setting up in terms of getting the mics going. I'm an observer watching as these things are unfolding. And there was a point where several people came from the building, the courthouse building, and approached a couple of the folks that were setting up the mic. And in that approach, from afar, you could sense a bit of tension. And I guess more individuals came, and I'm not quite certain where. Some came from along with the walkers, but I think the majority came out of the building and ended up creating, from my perspective, this bit of a wall of what I would perceive as authority in terms of how we were to conduct and use the space. And because of that visual, I know, and I do have quite positive relations with the city, and actually sit on a committee with John and others, that so I come from a different bit of context in terms of how I understand your work. But even in that, me having that experience with some of you, there was an immediate feeling of tension that we felt for a moment that this could escalate out of control because of how we were approached on that patio. So, and I think what's important for you to understand is that that way of, I guess, entering the space is going to, could have led to something quite opposite to what had happened. And I think what saved that situation from not escalating into something more probably violent, although it felt somewhat violent in terms of watching how the space was then occupied by security, and I'm imagining the police officers or whoever it is that was in charge of security at the building. They were in uniform. It felt for a moment quite a violent space. So the good news is that because the coordinators, Leela, and I don't know the other person's name, did such a fine job all the way up to the event, at the point of the event, at the introduction of the event, throughout the speaking of various individuals throughout the event. By that time, we were very confident in her leadership. I think I can speak only for myself, that we were going to respect her wishes and of wanting to create a peaceful space. And there were, at this point, people from the crowd responding to the physical presence and the approach taken with the leadership that we were all visually watching. Couldn't hear because we were farther away, so we could only assume what was happening. That I think that we were all able and capable and wanted to be respectful of her wishes that we moved to the sidewalk. But in that moment, which I think might have lasted maybe 5 or 6 minutes, I'm not sure, it felt longer, that there was a complete tension that was created that could have easily escalated and gotten out of control. So I guess what I'm here to do is to express this to you because of the role that you have in the city, and think about maybe, one, we were there as participants wanting to express a voice about a particular injustice. So out of that, there's things that are coming to light within your own community of London about how people are feeling about their own children and their safety. So there's some real learning here. This is not an event that should be seen as something happening to show only support for Saskatchewan and the Boucher family, but it's an opportunity for the London Police Board to hear what was being expressed there about their concerns generally about the justice system and how that relationship is always in a place of tension when it doesn't have to be. So I think the first thing I want to suggest to you is that you might want to consider calling the leadership who organized the event about their experiences that day, on how they were made to feel about that occupation of property. And then also from that learning, I think there might be some really good opportunities to talk about next steps and how those situations might be handled differently. I can't express to you enough how the leadership that took that responsibility for organizing such an event does so at their own personal risk. And even for the many participants who attended, they know that they're doing it at their own personal risk, and sometimes their own integrity is being questioned because of the topic at hand. So I don't think that the intent here is to smother particularly young leadership voices, but the reality is that it could be easily smothered if there's a sense that there's no give and take in terms of understanding about how to use that space in a peaceful way, that you can use a rally in order to express yourself that way. So I think that there's that piece, and then I don't want to see young leaders not take opportunities like that to express themselves, because I don't think they normally will find themselves in spaces like that we generally create for the public to use. And so I think those are very real, valid ways for the city to listen and learn about its residents if you were in attendance. And then finally, I think that the other important learning about this is that there's a real opportunity here to get at some of the reasons and rationale why various participants showed up that day. What is it about the justice system that they don't trust? What is it about their feelings of inequality that they feel so strongly that they're going to risk their own backlash, often on social media, by various racist and ignorant remarks, that they're willing to come and do it anyway? That tells you something, that there's something awry. And so I'm here just to, I'm quite comfortable in these forums. And so I think that in discussion with others who attended along with me, we've immediately, I think, felt that we needed to check each other and say, okay, is this how you felt? Is it just to be sure that we weren't overreacting and not, being realistic about what exactly was happening. And in fact, that is what the feeling was. And so that's why I'm here to express this to you today. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Miigwech. So I'll just look to the committee, the board for any questions. Any questions for, go ahead, Minister.
So thank you, Miigwech, Leslie. I am really touched by your courage to come forward with and presenting, your experience and sort of the collective experiences of people who were present that day. For disclosure's sake, I want to identify that I was also present at that day as a member of the Indigenous community and as a mother who was concerned for the safety of my own children. And, I saw this march as an opportunity to be with other people who felt the same way and to seek some sort of, sense of belonging with community, knowing that I was not alone in experiencing some reactions to what I believe was a violent verdict, and one that exemplified the systemic nature of racism against Indigenous people in Canada. And, I can validate that, your observations that you presented are ones that I also experienced and witnessed. And I think the point where I became concerned was that the tension that was introduced at this march, which was a peaceful gathering of people who were intending to provide solidarity and support for the Bushi family, that tension was introduced when the police presence came forward and created, a very deliberate configuration of bodies. And I think what became concerning was that the lack of communication in this situation created and actually contributed to the escalation of the tension. And I was concerned at one point that things would become violent because of that escalation. And so, my perspective is that could have been avoided through a more relational approach. I believe that there is an opportunity to look at this not just as a single situation or example where the tension could have been mitigated through a different approach. And in keeping with, my understanding about the systemic nature of not only the violence that we see perpetrated against Indigenous people, but also the response. We're in a period of reconciliation, And from my understanding, that means that we are going to have to not only identify and notice this tension, but question it and start to look at what that means in terms of how we can move forward. And that can only happen if Indigenous communities and, you know, different points of contact within the different systems who carry the power and authority work together. So I see this as an opportunity to build on the suggestions that we had here. And I guess I just want to know, you know, as a police services board, do you see a role for us in carrying forward that, I guess, those recommendations, or is there a motion here that you could suggest that we would be able to look at from a governance perspective?
I think there is an opportunity here for the Police Services Board to really show leadership in terms of across the nation about a response to a rally that could have flared out of control, and that the relational work could be happening behind the scenes, and we're all community members. We all know one another, or we could know one another. Often those leaders aren't going to go away. They'll be showing themselves in other ways. And so how can you as a London Services Board build that relationship with those young leaders, and how can their voices further be amplified as a result of this event? And I think your leadership as London Services Board could really set the stage for that. So as for a particular motion and the wording, I think just a commitment to have a further discussion between how that property is utilized and how people can express themselves in the City of London, and how the police play a role in the protection and safety of individuals expressing themselves that way is really a good start. I think that would be a good way to begin that conversation. I do want to acknowledge, you know, when we first started at Victoria Park, I did make a particular note of how the police were there right from the beginning, and made sure the traffic was not coming at us, and they actually stood beside us all through the walk. So it was, I guess that also set the stage that there was a confusing nature about this kind of onslaught that happened all of a sudden very quickly at the actual courthouse. So what had happened in terms of communications between all the police that seemed to know and be supportive going there, and what happened to the people that were in the courthouse and coming out, didn't seem to jive. And so that also caused an unexpected, what just happened to the support and security part of this picture. So long-winded answer. I don't know what the specific wording is, but I think that you do have an opportunity here.
Just look for any other speakers. Okay, thank you very much, Miigwech. And thank you again for coming. It's great to have you. So I'll look to the committee. If there's any further direction at this time. If not, we'll just go to item number 6. Sorry, go ahead, Susan.
Thank you, Chair Salee. I wonder if we should actually pass a motion in terms of continuing this discussion, and perhaps one of the things that the board can commit to is understanding the contents of the Truth and Reconciliation Report, and how we can apply those lessons from that commission in terms of our governance role, and then maybe as we move on from that process, how it might particularly apply to relationship building with our local Indigenous people.
Perfect, so I see that as a motion, so go ahead. And did you want to speak to it, or? Great, so it's been moved and seconded. Just look for any further discussion. Jeanette?
Thanks again, Ms. White-Eye, for coming and speaking with us. And I think I'd like to say, recognize that earlier in the year, I'm going to say, or end of last year, Ms. Toth, when we were doing community consultations, did mention reaching out to specific populations, and I believe the Indigenous population, members of our community, was one of those communities. I think just in the busyness, it's sort of on the to-do list. So I just would like you to recognize that it had been raised at this board before, and Ms. Toth had raised it, and thank you for bringing it to our attention again.
Thank you, and just to go further on that, because I know you're probably aware of it, but I believe Brian Hill was involved with the working group that myself and the chief co-chaired, and I know right now there's the theme, the training is focused on the Black community, but maybe, Chief, if you could give us a quick update on when the training around the Indigenous, I'm not sure, I didn't give you this question a heads up, but I know there's some training coming, and there might be some opportunities as well there.
Yes, so the current training wraps up in the middle of June. And I believe the next focus is LGBTQ community, and then it's First Nations, Indigenous following that. So Constable Teresa Lott has been working with individuals to bring that training to our organization. So essentially, we've left it in their hands as to what they feel that we should learn. So if it's okay with you, maybe I can have Constable Lott get in touch with you as well. And maybe this is another one of those things that we can add into the training and the relationship piece. Would that work?
It would, but I think you've got some.
Thank you very much. Vanessa?
Sorry, I just wanted to speak to the motion that Susan Toth put forward. So in keeping with the spirit of reconciliation, I think it is important to review the document. There are 94 calls to action that have been outlined very clearly, but how those are interpreted leaves a lot to question, and it is going to depend on the context. So to me, a part of reconciliation is truth-telling, and so I would add to the motion that we could start with this process by actually making the space to hear from members from the community, starting with those who were involved with the event on Monday.
So procedurally, I'm not sure how to best, I have no problem amending my motion to include that. I'm not sure if there's a process that needs to take place.
So I think it'd be within the purview of the board to have community consultations specific to that. As you know, we're going to be having community consultations around sexual assault investigations. You'll be updating on that later on as well. So I think it would kind of be within the same role as that. I look to the senior, not the senior in age, but senior in experience of the board committee, Jeanette, for maybe some advice on that procedural piece.
I just saw it as an amendment to the motion. And that's why I raised the fact that we had quasi-committed to that in the past, just hadn't gotten around to it. So I don't think I was involved in the motion, but I'm happy to second that if we're lacking that.
So it's already been moved and seconded, so I think that was just, they're just adding that amendment, so we'll just capture that. Jennifer, did you get that? Just wanted before we call the question. Seeing no further speakers, we'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And it carries unanimously. Thank you again, Miigwech. All right, so the next item is the minutes of the January 2018 meeting. So unless there's any concerns, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. So moved by, I was gonna say Councilor Brown, Mayor Brown, seconded by Jeanette. Any discussion? And we'll call the question. All those in favor? And it carries. So, Human Resources Report.
I have nothing to add to the report. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, though.
All right, any questions for the deputy? Nope, solid report, I guess. Any, and we'll look for a mover to receive the report. Toth, seconded by Brown. All those in favor? And it carries. All right, number 8, crime call and public disorder analysis mandatory board report. So this is mandatory. And back to Chief Williams, Deputy Chief.
This is an annual report that we we submit, and it just sets out our services plan relative to crime analysis and some of our more strategic responses to crime trends. So throughout the year, the board receives reports on some of the outcomes of these projects. You've heard about the stolen vehicle projects and break and enters to student residences and things like that. You get those reports throughout the year, and they often go out to the media as well. So this just sets out sort of an overview of our strategies.
Thank you, Deputy. Any discussion? Oh, Jeanette?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the Deputy Chief. It seems to me that a lot of this analysis depends on people reporting crimes. And then another thing I see coming up in our public agenda is the public needs survey, where a lot of people still don't know about our online reporting ability and don't always report crime. So is there, I was going to ask in that context, I would hope that we're continuing to promote that online reporting and continuing to try and push out there so these people who do this great analysis have the data with which to do it.
That's a good point. Every consultation we go to pretty well, in the 3 years, we're just at one last Thursday, that issue comes up as to whether citizens should report even seemingly minor crimes. And so we continually reinforce, yes, you need to report them, and how you go about reporting them, because these are all important for our analysts to know about, you know, the minor offenses that if they're not reported, we can't do anything about them. So we do publicize how to do that through, you know, our consultations and through our website, et cetera.
Any other speakers? So look for a mover and a seconder to receive report from the deputy. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Jeanette. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and it carries. So I guess I'm partly the one bringing this forward as well. So maybe Vice Chair, if you could take the chair for a sec.
Delighted to.
Thank you. So in review of the upcoming changes to whatever they're going to call the new Police Service Act eventually, or if they keep it to what it's called, I know there was talk about a community well-being plan, but then also kind of thinking about what the board wants to do and having its own strategic plan, because I know we're talking about a lot of things, and as you can see just here, I think if we have you know, collaborative approach and approach where we're all kind of heading in the same direction, I think it becomes a steering document. I've seen it work in my other capacity as a city councilor, where we have our city strategic plan has been quite helpful, and every time someone tries to steer away or deviate, there's someone quick to remind them about our strategic plan to keep the focus. And even I've been reminded a couple of times, because I'm always trying to add something in there. So, but that doesn't exempt things from coming up. So I wanted to, I guess at this time really, to kind of gauge the pulse of the board and move a motion to have us look at maybe a board strategic plan, a community well-being plan. And the reason why I wanted to do it at this early onset is instead of waiting until whatever is decided, maybe in the spring, in the summer, I don't know, and then being told that, as I seen from the outside, I wasn't directly involved at the time, but when there was new changes to some of the, you know, practice, for example, that we're talking about later on with collection of identification of information in certain circumstances, et cetera, the changes came, and it was an expectation for the police services across Ontario to change and get the training and to do all those things really quick. So if that's kind of the same approach where they're going to say every police board has to do a community well-being plan, and then we literally have like 30 days or something like that, I just want us to try to get ahead of the curve. And I think that's why if we're having this conversation now, so I'll put that on the floor and kind of listen to what my colleagues have to say. I don't know what exactly it will look like ultimately, because I don't know what the final decision is of the province, but I think it's important for us nonetheless to still have a strategic plan, and I think maybe we might be able to get some help from some external people to talk about board governance and what the board wants to do and where the board sees things going and some of our challenges there, and of course get the community involved. So I'll move that, and I think Susan, of course, is a seconder on that, and maybe she'll want to weigh in.
Are there any other comments first? Jeanette.
Thank you. I see two things on this agenda, a board strategic plan and a community well-being plan. And my sense of attending a conference in Halton where they talked about the development of a community well-being plan, it's not necessarily police-led, it's definitely police being a participant in, but it included the city, various health agencies and whatever. So I see them as two different items, and I just caution the board to treat them as two different items as they move forward, unless I'm missing my, excuse that, understanding of what you're talking about.
If I could answer through the presiding officer, you're right. So there were two separate things, but I figured they both sound like plans, so we'll talk about them at the same time. Because I don't know what might change from now until the province makes a final decision, and maybe they will talk about strategic plans too.
Any other comments, concerns?
Just a caution around the community safety and well-being plans, because within the new Bill 175 Safer Ontario's Act is quite specific that it's a municipality's responsibility. The police are part of the advisory or steering committee. And I caution that because many of the safety and the well-being have to do with vulnerable individuals in our community, homelessness, poverty, mental health, addiction, not policing responsibilities. A police board taking on that, again, we're taking on things that we've been trying to get out of for many, many years, and why throw ourselves back into the fire? So I just throw that caution out.
And that's a good point. And so I guess my intent was us to explore and see where that goes, and I think that's helpful in directing us there. I'm happy to send it to the city. I guess it'll come to me over there anyway and do that work there. But I just wanted to, I guess, us be situated in a position and get the information so that when, I guess, the city comes and asks us those questions, we're prepared at that time, because I don't know if the province does it in the spring and then the city, there's an election and everything in the meanwhile, and then we're supposed to talk to the city at that time, might be all kind of rushed. And I seem like that's what I anticipated. I don't want us to feel rushed on such an important kind of conversation. So I just wanted us to start kind of just familiarizing ourselves with it. And I guess in the motion where we can ask for clarification from the province when about exactly what this will look like and who's really going to fulfill these roles. I know there's kind of some draft language, but I just wanted to make it very clear and just bring it before the board. But yeah, they are two separate things, and I don't want us to take on more work, and I appreciate the comments from the chief.
Any other comments? Call the vote? Oh, absolutely.
So the motion is really for us to start looking into a board and strategic plan and get more further information on what a community well-being plan on those two pieces. And just for the board in principle to endorse having a strategic plan for the board in principle, and then what that might look like will be kind of based on the further conversations we might have amongst ourselves and how we do that, whether it's at different opportunities. But I just wanted to start that at this stage at a very high level to say that this is what we're going to be looking at so the community is aware and people can start talking about it from now. It might not be something that comes to fruition months from now, but I just wanted us at a very high level to kind of start hinting about it.
Did you want to respond, Member Eberhard?
I'm nitpicking perhaps, but I think I'd rather see a motion toward the board developing a strategic plan as a separate motion. And then if, as part of that plan, the board wants to make a commitment to being part of a process in being part of a city-led community well-being plan, that could be one of the pillars of the, could be an item within the strategic plan.
So just for clarification, so my motion was just the strategic plan, like all the pieces that we're talking about was just a strategic plan. The separate part was the getting more information about what the community well-being plan is. Like, so not endorsing it, not saying whatever, but getting more information. So having the board seek that information so that it comes back to us as an information piece, whether through administration, whether through our administrator here to just educate us on that. So I just wanted to put it on our radar. So it's two separate things. So we're just really voting on the strategic plan and then to get some info.
Any other comments? So we have a mover and a seconder. I'm going to call a vote. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Carried, and I'll hand over the chair.
All right, it's like hockey. So now Vice Chair has an item, board website and Twitter.
I will defer slightly to the chair on the Twitter aspect. But we've been having discussions as a board about whether or not the London Police Services Board should have an independent website, a website that is separated from the London Police Services, just in terms of maintaining that separation. So we are going to be looking into the costs of that. I was actually able to reach out to a few other police services board that do maintain their own separate website. So it's not universal across the board, but both Ottawa and Toronto do maintain separate websites. And just out of curiosity, I did ask what the costs were associated with that website. Ottawa's was quite low, was about $3,500 for their website plus an annual maintenance fee. However, the functionality of that website did not include high-level search. So if you went and tried to search a specific policy, for example, or something that was contained in minutes, that was not part of that website, which probably explains the cost associated with that. The Toronto Police Services Board has a far more functional website in terms of search capacity, and their website came at about a $15,000 roughly price tag. So those are the things that we're going to have to be discussing as a board in terms of how much functionality do we want, because with increased functionality comes increased costs, and how important is that such that the increased cost is justifiable. Obviously, we're accountable and you know, we have a budget. So perhaps what I might propose is that a motion that we move forward with pricing some options from websites from local website creators. I don't even know the language for that. Website developers, there we go. And find out what kind of functionality we want and discuss that as a board, and perhaps even if the community wants to weigh in to some extent and let us know what kind of functionality they want.
Great, and I'm happy to second that. As I mentioned to you offline, I think for me, real quick from the chair, quick comments, just I think it's great because it allows the board to really kind of have a relationship with the community as well, and so that there's a place where they can go and get information that's specific to board and governance and some of those pieces. Because I think right now, sometimes even for me, before I got in this role, there's really confusion sometimes with the board's job and the police services, and I think sometimes it makes it confusing, and sometimes it's even challenging when if the London police Twitter handle is tweeting something, what that looks like to the public is this is what the police service is saying, and sometimes not what necessarily the police board is saying, because administration has their role and we have our role, and I think sometimes it makes it confusing, and it's not really helpful. So I think it's effective, and I think having a Twitter handle as well, just to remind people about, for example, events like this and conversations like this. So happy to second that, and I'll just look around for any further discussion. Seeing none. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeanette.
Sorry, I feel like I keep asking for clarification. I think I heard the motion to say that we'd go out and price some options, but I think it's really difficult to go to a website developer and ask for a price when we don't know what the functionality we're after. So I think maybe the figuring out the functionality by doing more of the kind of research that I think Ms. Toth has done, then coming up with some kind of at least some quasi-RFP kind of with some guidelines before we get a price, I think is what we're going to need to do.
That's very smart, and I'm going to pretend that I came up with that idea. But no, I think you're absolutely right that it makes more sense to start with choosing the functionality. Now, to some extent, I do think that we may not want to finalize what functionality we choose until we know the prices, but I think you're right. Start with what's maybe our dream list, and then go from there. So I don't have a problem with that.
Great. Any further discussion? All right, and we'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Great. And Bill 175 submission, and Vice Chair again.
Thank you, Chair. Member Helmer isn't here to assist with this, but essentially what we as a board have been doing is reviewing the potential changes to the Police Services Act and numerous other acts associated with this Bill 175, the Safer Ontario Act. We are possibly going to have the opportunity to speak to a parliamentary committee in March. We haven't heard back yet confirming that we will be able to attend, but that is our hope, and we'll be able to bring forward some of our concerns, some of the positives, the negatives, and so on. I have started looking at the Act and creating a working paper on what I see as the positives, the potential concerns. I did reach out to the executive director of the Police Services Association, and I apologize, Rick, I meant to actually, I was supposed to call you and I didn't. But Mr. Robson, who is the ED, as I mentioned, provided some very helpful documents around what the Police Association's perspectives and concerns are, and I just wanted to highlight a couple because they were ones that I had identified as well. And I do want to point out there's lots of positives, and I think universally it's been acknowledged, depending on if you're on the board or management or associations, that there are some positives in the Act. But for example, one of the big concerns is there's the potential under the new Police Services Act to terminate an officer, or the board can terminate an officer who cannot meet the bona fide requirements of the job. And it's, if you're comfortable with any legal employment parlance, it's essentially this frustration of contract idea that if you can't perform those duties, you're done. And I think the way it's presented right now, it's quite problematic, and it essentially allows the potential for officers who are, let's say, struggling with PTSD or mental health issues to be terminated because they can't do the essential occupational requirements of the job. And so that's one of the things that we'll hopefully be bringing back to the committee. And we do really need more clarity around what is a core police function, and that's something that many people have identified, that there is the potential to privatize certain aspects of policing, and obviously from a cost-saving perspective, we want to explore that, but to do so in a way where we don't even know right now, it's not in the Act itself, what are those core police functions? It's something that we should know now up front versus the way it's framed, it's sort of, we'll decide that in the regulations. But by the way, once we decide that, these are all the things that you can privatize. So without that clarity, it's going to be hard to embrace that section of the Act. And certainly there's, I've heard things like the Walmartization of policing, and how much accountability does a private security company have when it comes to providing those services. So I did want to point out some of those big ones, but overall, there's some excellent changes, especially around providing more detail and guidance to the board around diversity, mandatory training, our engagement, our roles versus management's roles, and that operational governance divide. So there's lots of positives, but there are some gaps.
Thank you, and I know I just wanted to speak from the chair real quickly. I didn't see any hands in the interim, but I can come back to committee. The board. So I'm very supportive of those positions, and I'll take this opportunity to say, because I don't know if the province will give me another opportunity to say something in between, but me personally, I find it very offensive that there's that opportunity where potentially members who have, put themselves on the line and are impacted by post-traumatic stress, where I have the ability to, as a board, to terminate them. I think that's extremely offensive, and that should never happen, period. And I'll never support that, and I'll never do that in my capacity here. Always make sure that there's space for officers, and we'll make sure that there's employment for them here, especially after making such great sacrifice. As far as some of the core police functions, I think there's some clarity that's probably helpful there. And I do worry about the privatization of some of the roles. I know when I hear from the members of the community, people will say there's some, and I've had these conversations with the association as well, and I've been very upfront where I said, at times there's concerns of, okay, there's already calls for more oversight, there's this new changes to SIU, there's all these things, and then we're gonna say, in some regards, hypothetically, let's say, court services, we're going to have a security company, or, wherever it may be, and now there's less accountability, there's less oversight, then it becomes, it seems like we're going backwards in that sense, so I'm not supportive of some of those pieces, and the province has to be very, very clear about what they're talking about. But I hope that here in London, that we won't be supporting some of those kind of things, because it just doesn't make sense to, on one hand, ask for more accountability and oversight, and then say, we're gonna give those roles to, and it's no, not to take away from anyone else who does private security or anything like that, but to say, you can now do these jobs, that have these great responsibilities, and where you have people's lives in your hand, and you're less trained, and you're less paid, and you're less experienced, and all these things just makes no sense at all. So that's just kind of my personal perspective on those. So I just wanted to say that. And happy to second the motion.
Sorry, Chair Slee, there's one thing that I didn't mention, and that I think it's important to point out as well. You'd already mentioned this at the last meeting. It would be really nice if we could get some better timelines, perhaps actually built into the changes under the Safer Ontario Act for SIU investigations. And it can't be hardened for us to rule, because obviously there's going to be extenuating circumstances, but these 2-year processes, I mean, hanging that over someone's head, I think really is another thing I'd like to address.
Thank you, Chair, and exactly, I'm glad, because I know we brought it up last time, talking about the SIU investigations, and I stressed how stressful that is. I think I just read, I believe it was in Ottawa, where someone was just cleared, and I know the OACP was just made reference to that on their website, where they were talking about an officer in Ottawa, I think maybe a year or a year and a half was cleared after for administering naloxone. I'm not sure how long it was, but it was extenuating, just an excruciating long time to figure out who someone was helping an officer. So I think the other thing I'd like to mention to you, I know you've talked about this, is I'm happy and prepared to put a motion to support a position to get some strong clarification, immediate clarification around naloxone and what officers can do, because, you know, I don't want an officer to just kind of, I know they won't, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to go out there and do what they need to do. But to have to second guess themselves where they're just deciding to administer something that maybe saves someone's life, but then say to themselves, well, I'm going to be charged, or I'm going to be looked at in SIU, and I'm going to wait for a year and a half, is just absolutely, again, offensive and not acceptable at all. So I just, if we can formalize that as well in the wording. I forget I'm the chair, so any other speakers? Okay, we'll call the question. Sorry, just Jennifer, was that clear, the motion, or? Okay, great. So all those in favor? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, I believe that was with the addition of Chair Salih's, and how would you want to put it? I'll let you actually phrase that.
So, Sherry, yes, for clarification, it's the positions that Ms. Toff has brought forward, in addition to the SIU delays, stressing that as our position to bring forward for the Bill 175 submission, and just taking advantage of the parliamentary conversation opportunity, and to, you know, in a Part B, I guess, a letter being sent on behalf of the board to get clarification immediately on the naloxone, because I think it's unclear for our members right now, and it makes no sense, and it's unfair, and we need to do what we can to amplify. I know the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, I think just this week, the chief would probably be able to know better. I think they took a position, and they've took a strong position on it, and I think there's nothing wrong with us echoing the need for clarification coming from this board.
Yeah, the president of the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police wrote a letter to get clarity around it, and really what they're asking for is the same protections that officers have in other provinces around issuing naloxone, considering the opioid crisis and the number of deaths that we're experiencing. And ironically, we got a really quick reply from the SIU director. We don't get the same thing when it comes to the investigations. So, but he has maintained his position. So we're still waiting to hear from the provincial government.
Well, that's good to know that he maintains his position. Well, I'd like to let him know on behalf of myself that that's unacceptable and it's not good enough. And we'll go directly to the minister on this with that letter and make it very clear where London is on this, that we demand clarity. And if we can also, in that same letter, I think to clarify, copy every single member of provincial parliament that represents London area. I'm the chair. Okay, so we voted, right? So just to clarify, all those in favor? All right, and the motion carries. Geez, I keep forgetting. I'm waiting, I'm like, come on, Jeanette, let's go. All right. Back to Susan again.
So we added this to the agenda to start discussing how we as a board want to start proceeding with our governance issues and evaluating whether or not we want to establish subcommittees to deal with various issues rather than do them on an ad hoc basis, if we should formalize that. So one of the things that we've been committed to is trying to bring as much discussion in the public session as possible. So I apologize, sometimes that will mean that the public will be listening to us discuss procedural matters, but it's part of our commitment to be transparent. But on this one, I'd like to open it up for discussion from different board members in terms of, would we like to establish formal subcommittees? So for example, having one that deals with legal issues, having one that deals with community consultations, for example. Do we want to formalize that process? And then beyond that, in terms of board governance and training, do we want to start exploring having somebody come train us with respect to governance? And that might include specific expertise on the Police Services Act, or it might just be general board governance issues. So I'm just going to open it up. I don't have a motion yet. It's something that I wanted to bring to the table and start the conversation on.
I just want to state, I think, in terms of formalizing the subcommittees, I think given the size of this board, it would make sense. I know in terms of having discussions about some of the key priorities and how to advance them, it does happen ad hoc, but you know, I think it's better practice to have those roles formalized, outlined, make sure that we have a better opportunity to keep public record and ways to be able to display those notes so they're available for people so that they can see what the process is. I think the process is important. I think it matters who is part of that discussion around the process, and also looking at building on our relevant backgrounds and areas of expertise. I think it would make good sense for this case.
Jeanette? Oh, sorry, Jeanette, right? You have your hand up? And then the mayor.
Yeah, thanks very much. In fact, Vanessa, you're right. One of the reasons our board, in fact, we talked about going to from a 5 to a 7-member board even before it came up at City Council, because we felt we needed more people to do the work, and so subcommittees are right. And the mayor sort of leaned over and said to me, did I know what other boards did? And in fact, some of the background research I did when this was raised a little while ago was to look at other boards, and you can tell from their websites where you get all kinds of information that they in fact do this. And so I think it is a good opportunity for us, because we can delegate perhaps some stuff to those committees so that there can be some speed with which some decisions are made. They'll develop a little bit of expertise or make use of expertise, as Vanessa said. And so I would support that, partly because I probably won't be around here to be part of it. But I think it's a good move for the board. I do want to remind the board that we were cautioned by our ministry representative that we should take a close look at how public those meetings are, and that those minutes of those meetings, to the extent possible, are public. Just a caution that he raised with us.
You're absolutely right, and for context, that was from the province that said at one of our last meetings, so thank you for reminding us about that. Mayor Brown?
Thank you. I won't repeat what others have said. I think this is an excellent idea. I'm very supportive of it. I think one of the other benefits from moving in this direction is having a more efficient meeting as well at the board level. Certainly in our experience on council, a lot of the heavy lifting can happen at committees. There's extra time to deal with complicated matters at committees as well, and then we can bring formulated recommendations through to the entire board.
Great, and I think to add to that as well, I think of sometimes if some of the committees, for example, I know at council, at some of our committees, like standing committees, will have certain staff that are there. And I think sometimes that allows for that flexibility. For example, if we're talking something HR related into that one subcommittee, then you don't necessarily need all the three chiefs, because I'm sure they're very busy and have other responsibilities, so you might just, one area, deputy at that time could come for just that standing committee, so I'm supportive of it as well. But just to frame the conversation, so at this time, Susan, are we saying, yes, we want to head in this direction, and we're going to come back and say these are the subcommittees that we wanted to recommend, or do you want us to recommend subcommittee names and governance pieces now, or just for clarification for the members?
If people know right now what the subcommittees that they want, and even if we just did a preliminary list, then I'd be happy to bring that forward as a motion. And if we don't, I think that's fine as well. We can start having those discussions and then have a formal list. I think it is clear that we should probably have some sort of a community relationship, and we may even want to be specific and have one that is to build relationships with Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But beyond that, I think perhaps a legal subcommittee might make sense, but I'm open to formalizing that list later.
Vanessa?
I was just going to state, in consideration of our earlier conversation around developing a board strategic plan, to me, once we see the pillars that are under the strategic plan, it would make sense to have subcommittees that reflect those pillars. So I definitely think, what we do now may have to be an interim approach, considering we don't have that direction solidified at this point in time. But that being said, I don't want to delay the opportunity to address some of the key issues that have surfaced and have come forward, particularly around the community relations or community consultations, or whatever it looks like under that bucket. So and obviously legal being such a very specific focus and specialty, I would support having an initial focus on those two areas, and then with the understanding that we would review once there was a strategic plan in place.
Great, so look to the mover.
So we could do a motion to initially establish, at least on an interim basis, a legal subcommittee and should we call it, Vanessa, community relations subcommittee? And then we can add more subcommittees as we go forward, with the understanding that that might change once we have a strategic plan in place.
Sorry, it just occurred to me that we do have work underway in the area of policy. So I would add to that policy.
Legal and governance. Yeah, so let's make the subcommittee legal and governance. Should we make it, Vanessa, were you thinking general policy subcommittee? Because what we're doing right now, it mostly involves just the sexual assault investigation policy.
So as you guys are thinking, I'm just gonna throw a quick wrench. I got someone who's really smart beside me. And I guess perfect timing, associations here as well. But there's also gonna be budget and negotiations as well. That will probably have to be, when is that? Coming up soon? Next year? Okay, so maybe I won't even be around council. Who knows what they'll do.
Okay, so right now we have legal and governance, just policy, general policy subcommittee, and community relations subcommittee.
So sorry, I thought it was gonna be the legal and governance were one, and then that the community was separate, I thought was, because I think maybe sometimes, I don't know how much legal stuff we'll be having that often or too much to say about, so.
That makes sense.
Okay, so just, I guess maybe just read the motion off just for Jennifer's sake again.
Okay, motion to establish on an interim basis 3 subcommittees, legal and governance, community relations, budget and negotiations, with the understanding that we may add to those subcommittees, and those subcommittees may change depending on the strategic plan.
Perfect.
We don't have one on policy?
That would be under governance. So governance would capture policy as well, yeah. So great. So seeing any further discussion? All right, we'll call the question. All those in favor? And it carries. All right, Deputy Longworth, 2017 Public Needs Survey.
Sure, thank you. So as part of our 2019 to 21 business plan development process, a public needs survey was conducted in the fall of 2017. And the results of that survey is contained in the report in front of you now. I'd like to thank all the members of the LPS for their hard work in compiling the data, putting the surveys out, and preparing the report that you have in front of you. And just to let you know that in the AODA compliant version of that report in front of you will be posted on the website immediately following this meeting. The survey provides information that assists us and bases some decision making that we have to do and better understand the needs of our citizens as we prepare the business plan, as I mentioned earlier. And the survey was distributed to 5,000 random households throughout the city of London. And there was communication on the survey inviting those who required translation services to request it if they required. We did receive a response rate of 24%, which translated into 1,213 completed surveys that were returned to us, which provided a solid sample from which to work. There's a lot of material obviously contained in that survey to digest. However, I'd like to highlight some of the feedback that we received in the survey. Close to half the respondents felt that their level of knowledge had increased as a result of various communication strategies that have been implemented within the last 2 years. Over half of the respondents feel that they'd like to see more bicycle and foot patrols, and that goes hand in hand with a lot of the information we received from our community consultations, both at the board level and as well as the over a dozen consultations that the chief and Deputy Williams and I had conducted over the past year. Seemed to be a constant theme about wanting to see more police on bikes and on foot. The majority of the respondents felt that and indicated that they were satisfied with the overall quality of the police services. And when compared to 2014 survey, there was an overall improvement, particularly in the categories of being approachable, fairness, knowledgeable, and professional appearance, which is good for us to see. The top 5 issues identified, and these top 5 always seem to be the same top 5 no matter what community you go to or what kind of survey you conduct. Drugs and drug-related crime obviously was number 1. Traffic-related concerns, number 2. Crimes against property, number 3. Crimes of violence and mental illness. The results of this report, as I mentioned, will inform our priorities as we develop the business plan going forward, in addition to other information received from the community. So, subject to any questions?
Great. So for its community, I just had some technical questions that might help shape the conversation that I wanted to put out there. When we say households, that encaptures, I know it might sound like a silly question, but that also means apartments as well. Do we know if that? And when we talk about being sent out randomly, do we know from the address and the data if you have got a good balance of the different communities? Because I know sometimes you guys probably hear this and I hear this, like the East End, nobody's doing something for the East or something like that. So I just wanted to make sure that it was kind of all across from the city, if that's helpful.
Yeah, the process is quite complex, and that's why we have well-educated people in the areas of data, gathering data, perform this for us. To answer your first question, yes, the households means a variety of living accommodations areas. And it's my understanding that the database is compiled by tabulating from a random sample of over 100,000 residences, which then is randomly shuffled through a formula to try and get the best and most accurate and broadest base of the community responses that we possibly can.
Perfect, great answer. Just look to the board. Vanessa?
I think just to follow up with the comment from the chair, I think what would be helpful in these types of circumstances and help us to sort of gauge where the information is coming from is often when surveys are being used and data is being collected, there's a way to detail and disclose the limitations of that particular methodology. And I just wonder if it's possible to disclose what the limitations are, just so we have a better sense of how we can interpret and place this information within the context of the full breadth of the City of London.
Yeah, that's a valid point, and contained in the survey is a lot of the methodology and the rigor that was imposed during this survey. And if there, this is going to be posted publicly, and subject to any other questions or concerns you may have, I can certainly gather that information from the people who pose the survey, who might be able to better answer your question as to, yes, this is good data that we can rely on, and here's the source of the data. I thought I had.
Sorry, just to clarify, I think I'm asking specifically for the people who led the data collection process, just to disclose the limitations of this particular approach.
As you're taking that note, I just wondered also, I know sometimes when we at the city, I think, when we have surveys and stuff, sometimes we make sure that the ones who did it for us, sometimes because there's maybe those technical questions, I'm not sure if that's maybe helpful, if that's part of the price, that they come in and answer those methodology kind of questions. I'm not sure if there's help in that part, but I don't know if that's helpful for Vanessa's question.
We do a great majority of this in-house with the expertise we have in-house. We're very lucky to have that. In answer to the question about the integrity of the data, I can say it does point out that there's a plus or minus margin of error of minus 2.8%, 19 times out of 20. However, I did note your specific question, and I'll take that back to them to see if they can provide you with something that would better answer that.
Sorry, Jeanette, just make sure, Vanessa, you're good? Okay, go ahead, Jeanette.
Yeah, I think what Vanessa's pointing out is whenever you use a survey methodology, be it phone, be it online, whatever, there's an inherent bias that comes with it, you know, that you can't control. And I think that's really what you're just speaking to. What is the inherent bias that comes with doing a mail survey, a survey by mail? I noticed that, and I think Joan has expressed my appreciation to her, because I think she's one of the professionals you're referring to, and I've always appreciated her skills. I noticed that she mentioned that the data were weighted to reflect, better reflect the actual demographics of the city. But to the point that was made earlier, and I can't remember who made it, about where all of our communities represented, I noticed that we asked for the first 3 digits of the postal code, and if sufficient people answered that, we could probably comment on whether or not the respondents reflected the geography of the city, you know, because we know those demographics. I'm sure the city knows the demographics in terms of the percentage of the population in each of those 3, based on those postal codes, and could comment on whether or not we felt we got that representative sample. Might be another question, just.
And I noticed, I guess I'll ask my question. I noticed that you could see a growing, at this rate, it seems as if Facebook and the internet really were going to lead the way in the next, I guess, survey. Seems to be that's going to continue to grow. And it's interesting that the radio is still popular. I didn't know how popular it was, so maybe that's, that's interesting. Any further discussion or questions? Oh, Susan?
This is something that happens every 3 years, correct? With the business plan. So I believe we had talked about this initially before this went out, but it was a little bit too late. I know you had included the line about if you require translation assistance, which I think was really important, and I'm very glad to see that in there. I wonder if the next time around we can include those little cards that actually have it in a language other than English, just so that, because obviously if your English is not your first language, you might not even be able to read that. I do think it's a really positive start, but something for maybe the next round, which I guess would be 2019. This is the 2017 survey, 2020. Perhaps something, again, to consider. I wonder if there would be value in asking, again, optionally, for respondents to identify any enumerated grounds that they might identify with, whether it's sexual orientation, race, and so on. And that way you'd be able to break down that data. I know in the survey, it gives you the option of stating what your gender is, again, optional, but some people fill that out, and maybe we can actually expand that section to include other factors as well.
Just on that, I think it's a great idea, considering the next time this goes around, it's going to be a board responsibility. I support all of those recommendations, so.
I think we've been mired in the, some of the details here for a minute, but I do want to take a step back and express appreciation. Having done survey work a lot in the past, whenever I would go and report to a client, I would say to them, if there aren't 10 or 15% of people saying they're dissatisfied at some level, you didn't really do a survey of the public. And so I think this service should be very proud of the fact that by and large, across pretty much all categories, that the positive response was in the 80 and sometimes exceeded 90% in terms of satisfaction. And I think that's we should not lose track of the good news story that is both in this year and in the preceding years, and that has held fast, despite what I would say are, you know, some times when police are under more scrutiny these days. So to hold those numbers and improve on some, I think is credit to the service. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? So I'll just say from the chair, just kind of echo the appreciation. It's quite a lot of work here. Just very thankful. And it is helpful to kind of have an understanding of just things that sometimes are just kind of nice to know. But I think my question, I guess, for administration, that maybe will be helpful for members of the public who are following this, because I don't know if it was maybe articulated in the survey letter, but I know it, again, silly question, but just helpful for them. So you guys will take this information, and I'm assuming it's going to help shift, kind of shape the future or kind of how you guys do business. But I just thought maybe there might be an opportunity to kind of explain what you guys now do with this, and how you guys maybe take that in as consideration, just for the members of the public who might have some interest of knowing that their survey wasn't just so we could just look at it and nod, but that it goes somewhere.
Yeah, there's certainly one significant piece of data that we use to shape our priorities going forward for the future, in addition to the community consultations, like I mentioned, but we also look to internal data that we can look at as well. But certainly the feedback from the community helps us better understand what the community's expectations are of their local police service, and how we can better respond to those needs and plan and strategize on how we're going to deliver policing services going forward.
Perfect, that is very helpful. And we'll look for any further speakers. We'll look for a motion to receive the report from the deputy. Moved by Mayor Brown, seconded by Vanessa. All those in favor? And it carries. Deputy Chief Longworth again, back at it. Interim report on the collection of identifying information in certain circumstances. Long name. I'm still waiting for someone to pick a better nickname than CI2 or whatever it's called.
Sure, it's a very, this is a little shorter report than the last one you looked at. However, I'm going to take a little more time to walk through the report. As you're all aware, on January 1st, 2017, the Ontario regulation on the collection of identifying information in certain circumstances was initiated under the Police Services Act. The regulation applies with respect to an attempt by a police officer to collect identifying information about an individual from the individual, if that attempt is done for the purposes of inquiring into offenses that have been or might be committed, inquiring into suspicious activities to detect offenses, and gathering information for intelligence purposes. The regulation requires that the chief prepare an annual report on the collection of identifying information. I'd like to thank Inspector Allen, who's here with us today, for this report, as well as Sergeant Andy Whitford, who prepared a lot of the data and contributed to this report. In completing this report, we wanted to speak to and address each of the specific requirements that are defined within the legislation. In 2017, the London Police Service attempted the collection of identifying information on 6 occasions. Of these 6 attempts, all resulted in the collection of personal information. In some cases, there were multiple people involved in the interaction, and as a result, there were 10 people in total from whom information was collected. The report references a number of situations that the chief is required to report on, many of which the answers is going to be 0. However, I've listed them on the report to provide you with a full understanding of what the legislation requires us to report on and the results in each category. For example, these interactions are voluntary conversations, and individuals are not required to provide any identifying information. In certain specified circumstances, an officer may choose not to inform the individual of the ability to refuse to provide information if the officer felt that in doing so, he could compromise the safety of the individual an ongoing investigation, identify a confidential informant, or any other person in the community. In 2017, no officer saw the need to invoke this option, and therefore there was no impact on the yearly total, which resulted in a 0. So you'll see line by line the requirement and the responding times that happened, like I said, many of which were 0. Upon the collection of an individual's identifiable information, the officer must note the sex, age group, racialized group, and the location the interaction took place. For each category, the data collected was either identified specifically by the individual or perceived by the officer. For the criteria of the age groups and racialized groups, we use the same categories as those established by the Government of Canada's National Household Survey. Their neighborhoods identified. I do have maps with me that actually I can ask you to pass those down. We struggled because we recorded them within patrol zones, and then we looked at our broader core zones, which reporting to you probably wouldn't mean anything. So we've identified them in the written copy of the survey as two collection of identifying informations took place in the downtown area, 3 in the central east area of London, and 1 in the central west area. Those are more specifically plotted out in the maps that you have in front of you. You can see a dispersion without the city where those occurred. When identifying information is attempted or collected by a police officer, there's a very strict process to determine if the information is compliant with the legislative requirements. If the interaction is determined to be non-compliant, the record is removed from searchable police databases and access is restricted to that record. In 2017, of the 6 collections, through the review process, 4 were deemed to be non-compliant with the legislation. In each of the 4 non-compliant collections, the officer did not notify the individual that they did not have to identify themselves. And further, in each occasion, the individual was not supplied with a receipt, both of which are required under the legislation. All 4 of those non-compliant interactions, which were deemed to be non-compliant, were thoroughly reviewed. No misconduct was identified on behalf of the officer. The officer was spoken to and educated on the requirements of the legislation. So we're treating this in the initial stages more as a learning tool to provide better training and understanding amongst our officers. Once an interaction has been deemed non-compliant, access to it is restricted. And there are specific circumstances in which the data can be retrieved, and that's under the strict approval and authority of the police chief in adherence with the legislation. All 6 of the interactions, the collections, occurred in distinct areas across the city, as you'll see from the map. As you'll see from the chart on page 2 of the report, 9 of the collections were from male individuals, 1 being female. 6 of the interactions were people between the ages of 13 and 19. 3 of the interactions were involved people between 20 to 29, and 1 interaction was an individual between the ages of 30 to 39. 7 of those 10 individuals were white, 1 from the Black community, 1 from the Hispanic community, and 1 from the Middle Eastern community. Our officers are cognizant of the legislation and are sticking to the legislation as best they can. This legislation is complex, it is new, and I'm sure there is some uncertainty on the part of our officers. However, we've been working hard as an organization to better train and equip our officers with an understanding not only of this legislation, but to be more aware and understanding of our diverse populations and any implicit bias that we may have. We've run a number of programs to better educate our officers, like Diversity 101, which we conducted in 2016. This year, as we discussed earlier, we have Mr. Leroy Hibbert from LUSO. He's coming in on a weekly basis and addressing every single member of this organization, including the 3 of us, about cultural awareness with a specific focus on the Black community. And this is something we plan to continue, this type of diversity training, focusing on different areas of cultural diversity within our communities. In addition to this training, our full-time diversity officer and the duties that she performs, we've had several members volunteer to be part of our newly created diversity ambassadors team. And this team goes out into diverse communities and attends community functions. We continue to reach out to our diverse youth communities through Rookie Baseball program and our newly resurrected Joe League basketball program, our Yippee and Peace teams. Our officers interact with the public through our school resource programs, our citizens police academies, our youth academy, and soon our business academy. As a result of our proactive efforts, we continue to engage the community and communicate with our diverse communities on a daily basis. And this is another strategy we're using in addition to these legislated interactions that are to ensure that our officers are out there engaging our community on a consistent and regular basis each and every day. We're confident that that's continuing to happen. We will continue to adjust to this legislation. It is new legislation. It's only been 1 year that we've been tracking the data. Prior to that, there was no requirement for us to track this data. So as we go forward, we're going to continue to grow, continue to adapt, and continue to respond. As you know, because we all consulted with Justice Tulloch recently, he's conducting a review on behalf of the ministry, and depending on his findings, depending on his recommendations, and depending on the ministry's response, we'll adapt to those changes as they come out as well. So subject to any questions, that's my report to you.
So the map that you're referring went up during your discussion. I had staff put it up on the screen so it could be followed by the live stream as well as members from the community can see what you're talking about. So this, for the benefit of everyone here in the chambers, that's the map that the deputy was referring to. So I'll look to the committee for any questions. Yep, go ahead, Susan.
Oh, sorry. That's a good way to just keep you guys quiet. I just learned that.
I see how it's going to be. I just wanted to actually, it's less of a comment or a question, more of a comment to follow up to make sure people caught that if you're watching, or just in terms of making sure the public is aware. We did meet with Justice Tulloch. Justice Tulloch met with the board separately, and then he spent, I believe he was here for 2 days, is that not right? And he met with management and different departments from all the way from Foot Patrol and onwards, is that right? So we did spend some significant time here, which was wonderful. And just so that the community is aware, there is going to be an opportunity for the community to also provide feedback to Justice Tulloch. He will be coming to London on April 11th. And that's going to be at the Delta Armories. And there's going to be a light dinner served at 5 p.m. So at the very least, there'll be free food. So if nothing else, I just want to encourage people to go to that. It's an opportunity to provide feedback on the regs. And I know that I think we can all be in agreement that the regs as written were quite complex, confusing. There's certainly better ways of communicating what those regulations were supposed to accomplish. And so at a minimum, that would be one of the things. I will be there on the 11th, and I would encourage as many people as possible to go and provide that feedback. And in my experience, Justice Tulloch is a very, very intelligent, highly educated, very, very balanced, fair individual, and I think it would encourage the community to have some faith in that process, even though I know that's difficult, and to attend and to speak their mind and use that opportunity to speak with him and his team directly.
Any other members? Did you? Go ahead. Okay, Chief. Sorry. Oh, sure.
Well, if I don't say it now, then it's not going to make sense. But when I heard Ms. Toth talking about balanced and fair for a minute there, I thought she was talking about me, and then I realized she was still talking about Justice Tulloch. But just a couple of things, and I know that Deputy Chief Longworth commented on this about, you know, there were some challenging times around this in our community. But I think what is evident is that we did come together with our community to have some very difficult discussions. I know before the board, Ms. Toth was part of that group that I met with, and Councillor Salee, and then Shauna is here as well. You're not here just for this, though, are you? Okay. The reality is, though, that we made a decision that we wanted to strive to do better. And I think a lot of the credit has to go to the frontline members that didn't use this as an impediment to interacting with the community, but chose to do things differently, to find that balance between interacting with the community with, you know, balancing the civil liberties of individuals and ensuring community safety. And the deputy mentioned some of those programs. Those programs were grown from our members, the frontline members. And, you know, they wanted to work directly with the community. You know, there's the Joe League and Rookie League. There's a couple other ones, you know, the Diversity Ambassador team that we had members step up to do. There's Coffee with Cops. There's community meetings that our members go to with us to be part of that. A lot of the work that's done by officers, you know, when they're out on their beats. And then one of the things that happened in the last year or so as well with our frontline officers when we had our executive briefings with them is they brought forward the idea that they wanted to work in the same neighborhoods because they wanted those neighborhoods to get to know them. These are ideas that are coming from the front line, the people that want to make that difference. They have been criticized in the past, but I think people have to realize that they are working hard to do the best they can, and we can't lose sight of that. And I just want to make sure that that was heard.
I'll give a shorter version of the same. Actually, I wanted to speak to that as well, and I can say with firsthand experience as a high school teacher, to see a police officer, you know, in the school on a regular basis, the kind of relationships that have developed with students, in my experience, has been powerful, and so I wanted to comment on that. I also feel that we need to ask, because this was quite controversial when it came forward, and we did strive to do better than the minimum standards, and it was a community solution, but there were concerns raised about just ability to police, about community safety, and now that we're a year in to this new practice, how is it affecting policing? How is it affecting community safety, if at all?
I think it's really too early to answer that question. This is the 1 year into it. We're hearing anecdotally that there might be information gaps that our investigators are having because they don't have in their impression the information coming in. Again, because the numbers, we've only focused on a track for a year, it's going to be hard to say that. We've never had to track it before. We've never had to justify the information coming in through these types of interactions, how valuable it was to investigations. Now we're trying to do a better job of that. So over a 3, 5, 7 year period, we'd probably be able to better answer that. But I think, as the chief touched on, we've tried to ensure we're maintaining communications with the public each and every day, and that's where the true value of information coming in is going to come from. If we're inhibited by any other legislation that prevents us from doing something, it's going to strengthen our relationship with the community, because the community is the one, 9 times out of 10, hold the information. We can't do our jobs with the community's help without them calling us and providing us information. So the better relationships we can establish, and that's what we've been striving for long before this legislation became an issue, was to strengthen those relationships with the community. And as the chief mentioned, we're not perfect. There's always room for improvement, and we're striving to improve. And that's, I think that's how we're going to continue to do our jobs effectively, despite any type of legislation that may come out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. I wondered, the public has the right to do a freedom of information request about one of these. Have we had any of those? And just, well, so we don't turn microphones on and off again, I think I'll ask the second one too. These numbers are stunningly low, I think, and I'm just wondering if you have any sense what other police services are experiencing in terms of their numbers.
I'll answer the first question. As far as freedom of information complaints, we've had 0. In relation to the second complaint, or the second question, I'm aware of Ottawa's results that came out. I can't remember the specific number. It was very, very small. I know, I don't want to say too much because I was speaking to the member from Hamilton who's doing her report as well today, and I don't know if she's delivered it or not yet, so I don't want to speak, but I would suggest it may be consistent. And I know the chief had some information about Toronto, and I don't know if those numbers are public yet or not either. Yeah, so I'm hesitant to say until they've gone public.
So I think I wanted to ask something. I know the question that I had was around when we're talking about the past and just kind of, I know people wanted to try to compare the two, but they are substantially different, and it's hard to really kind of grasp that, because I know as I've now being a board member and having a little bit more information, it seems to here historically there were, if you kind of maybe touch on the numbers, right? Like if we had, for example, in the year 10,000 in the past, that was because those captured for sometimes interactions such as, I think it was maybe like when you're stopping a towing, when there's like a towing, or kind of like some of the ones that, because I think what people are seeing now is you went from thousands to, 7 or whatever it is right now. And maybe if you could kind of bring us back a bit and talk about the past ones and why it captured so much information, so people that are maybe just following now have a better understanding of where we're at today.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered your own question, because you're right. Previously, the numbers that were provided when this first became a topic back in 2015, at least in the London Police Services experience, that it was called a street check within the database. That form was used to capture a myriad of administrative functions that we performed, and it was just because it was a tracking system that was available to us. So certainly the numbers that were reported out at that time were definitely inflated. Didn't speak to through the lens of specifically what this type of interaction is defined as today through the legislation. So the numbers that were reported out can't in no way, shape, or form can be compared with the numbers we're reporting today. I think what we need to do is focus on the number today and going forward and using this as a baseline, because it's never been tracked before through the lens of the legislation provided. Let's use this as a baseline going forward to compare next year's results with this. We still see value in these types of interactions. We still want to see our officers engaging the public in these types of interactions, in keeping in compliance with the legislation. And like I said it during my my presentation, this is new legislation. It's complex. It's very convoluted, even for legal minds to get through and understand. It's going to be a growing process and an adapting process for our officers to understand that this is not designed to be critical. No one's being critical of the officers, and we still expect them to go out and engage the community and rely on the tools that they've been provided through law, whether they're conducting an investigation or they're simply working off some of the definitions, where they suspect a crime has or might occur, following up on that instinct and articulating why they're doing what they're doing, having a conversation in keeping with the regulations with a member of the public, and doing what we expect them to do each and every day for public safety.
And I guess my follow-up question, so the province really said, this is what you're gonna do, every police force in Ontario, and with some input and some things, some things happen, some things not everyone's all on board with. But as far as the impact it has had of trying to roll this out, I know there was some pains to, or not pains, I know there was a lot of work needed to get in to get everybody trained. And just, I know the dollars that were probably impacted with all of that. And to me, it seems like I don't think the province really, it was just all internal funding for that to get us there, was my understanding. Like the province didn't say, here's a check, do this. So maybe you could kind of maybe touch on that. I don't know if there's some value in just kind of speaking to that.
Yeah, as you recall, this happened very, very quickly. The legislation was thrown together. Training was imposed. Mandatory training was imposed on the organization, and we had a very, very small timeline to develop the training, deliver the training to our entire staff, which was very difficult to do. There was significant cost impacts on our organization because of that, because of the short time when we didn't have time to plan out the training over a period of a year. We had to deliver it within a 2 to 3 month period. So that was difficult. There was a burden on the organization financially for that. I was going to make another comment based on what the points you made. I forget what that is right now. But there's, like I said earlier, there's always room for improvement. The training will continue. Now that we've had time to digest and look at 1 year out, we'll certainly maybe adapt to some training, but the cost is borne completely by the organization. There's no funding provided by the ministry for anything associated with this type of training.
Yeah, so those are some of my challenges and really comments for the province when they roll this out, just in the manner of the way it was done and just the expectation, and just asking the municipalities to be the ones solely responsible for this. I don't know if there was an opportunity for them to look at that in the future at OPC, the Ontario Police College, and to at least send some sort of relief for officers monetary wise, because I think what will happen is, hypothetically, if they say, well, these are the 3.0 3.0 and CI 2.3 or whatever they want to call it at that point. Now there's new training and new costs, and they do this in the 2-month window, and then it comes back to us and impacts us again in the short term. Those are just some of the concerns I have, especially with something that I don't think is perfect. I mean, I know there was a lot of positives that came here because it came from grassroots and from community people, but I still have concerns and I still have challenges. But I mean, we've had our conversations with Justice Tulloch, and I know you guys had a conversation as well from administrative position, and just kind of let them know about the pains. Was there anything that you thought might be a value of the London community sharing from your perspective that you wanted to share at this time or not? Kind of what you've kind of relayed to Justice Tulloch, I don't know. If not, that's fine, but I just wanted to give you that opportunity if there was.
We had, well, really the 2 days were split up. The administration had about an hour and a half, I think almost 2 hours in the morning to meet with Justice Tulloch. And some of the discussions is really what you're talking about. What are some of the challenges with getting the training done? And we walked through that. We talked about, how complex the legislation was. He agreed with that. It's very difficult. And quite frankly, I couldn't, I wonder how a new officer with absolutely no experience, when they would read that, really understand what it means. And so there's some challenges with that. The other thing we talked about more with Justice Tulloch is, the adjustment to our community. And I think you've heard much of that today, is that we moved on. We comply with the legislation, we adapt, we move on. But we look for those opportunities to continue to strive to do better. And some of those programs and services, the training that we brought in, we talked about members from our community that have come in and provide the training, diversity training, which is a little bit different than what you normally see from the structured police training. So it was, I think it pretty well captures it. We had a lot of discussions just about the challenges with it. And but really, it's about moving on, adapt, move on. I mean, you can't sit and complain about what's already been, so.
Thank you. So, Ms. Toff?
I just wanted to very, very quickly follow up on something that the chief had said earlier, and that was just a reminder that here in London, we chose to take the regulations and turn it into a policy, and this was before my time on the board, and make it a stronger, better document. I think it provided a lot of clarity as well, and I'm continue to be very proud of the work that we did as a community and the work that we did in collaboration with the chief. And I think some of what came out of that policy was really powerful, and I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that.
And just as a quick thing, just give me a nod if I'm right. So members of the public can continue to get FOIs, and I believe because of Susan and the work there, it's free. And they can access that information online now, and you guys have a FOI turnaround of like 20. Okay, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Don't mislead them on the FOI request. So the record checks is the quicker turnaround. So one thing at a time. But the FOIs, yes, you can you get the information online or come into the station to fill out the request. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the turnaround is, but I think the idea is that we'd waive the fee and do it as quickly as possible with those requests. So.
Okay, I just wanted to highlight that because that is one thing that's unique to London. I don't think there's any other city that does it that way. Am I correct, Chief? There's no other city that does the waiving of the $5, from your understanding?
I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks. So any other further discussion? All right, so we'll go to the next item, which is new business, which is me. So if Ms. Toff could take.
Just can I have a motion to receive that report? Moved by Mayor Brown and seconded by Member Ampton-Smith. All in favor? Right, any opposed? Seeing none, carried.
Sorry, I was just trying to find my motion that I had. So I wanted to bring a new business which is related to the public having an opportunity to weigh in. The public to have an opportunity to weigh in at the public board meetings. So my intent is to slowly find it and let's talk about things as we go. So I'll just read it off. Prior to the conclusion of the London Police Services Board public meeting, my intent is to have time reserved for any resident in London to speak directly to the board in public session. Residents will have up to 5 minutes each to speak to matters related to the London Police Service Board. I'll stress that line again, London Police Services Board, whether on the current agenda or new business. The board will typically reserve 15 minutes at the end of each meeting for public input and may extend the time allocated by way of majority vote. Upon the completion of the presentation to the board by a delegation, any discourse between members in the delegation shall be limited to members asking questions for clarification and obtaining additional relevant information only. Members shall not enter into debate with the delegation respecting the presentation. The public should be aware that the public input session open mic is an opportunity for the community to share information concerns with the board for further consideration within their roles as board members. The purpose of this policy is to ensure space for community voices at every board meeting and allow for the public to ask questions or raise concerns that the board should be aware of. So I did want to stress that this is specifically and strictly within the board's role. It would be the conversation. There is always going to be mechanism for members of the public if they have concerns with police conduct, misconduct, those things. There are those mechanisms that you can get that information. Whether you ask me or any police officer will be able to share that information is also available on the London Police website. So this is strictly conversations for members of the public to have with the board and within our role. So I'm putting that forward and look for a seconder. I believe Susan was good for that. So I will put that and she's chairing the meeting, by the way, so.
There we go. All in favor? Or any discussions, actually? Let's start with questions. Mayor Brown.
I think it's an excellent idea. I talked a little bit earlier in this public portion of the meeting about finding ways to, introduce efficiencies to our meetings. Hopefully the subcommittees will free up time so we can hear directly from the public. I think it might also be a good idea for us to consider starting our meetings at maybe 9 a.m., for example, instead of 10 a.m., to ensure that we have enough time for this very important new piece of the agenda.
Did you want that as an amendment to the motion or as a separate motion?
I really just raised it for discussion. I wanted to bring that to the board's attention, and I don't know that we'd need a motion to change our meeting time. I think that we could meet at the call of the board chair.
So yeah, and I'm happy to do that. I guess we can go with, I guess at the time when I have the agenda and kind of determine what time would work at that point. And just because I know our colleague, Councillor Helmer's in Ottawa, to also give him an opportunity to kind of weigh in. But I think the only thing I wanted to say is that sometimes the later in the afternoon, the better for public engagement, as you know, because we rarely have a PPM before 4 p.m. at City Hall. And because no one's going to show up during the middle of the day, it's very hard, but people do that. But so thanks to the members of the public for coming in today as well. But yeah, to your point, there's some value in that perhaps. But I guess as long as that works for sometimes administration, I don't know what their schedules look like on those days.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? And carried. And transferring the chair role back to the chair. Okay, so I guess technically since that motion has passed, that is now a reality. So from my understanding, I guess since this is the first opportunity for members of, sorry.
Excuse me, Chair, I believe Ms. Toth asked for another item of other business around an update for the sexual assault policy update before we get, thanks.
That's why you're here, Jeanette. Thank you.
Yeah, just a very, very quick update. The Salvation Army Correctional and Justice Services has very kindly agreed to put its name forward as well as one of the agencies and organizations that will receive feedback and input from anybody who would like to have their anonymity preserved. So that's being added to the list that right now was ANOVA, Safe Space, and the London Abused Women's Centre. So I think that's excellent news, and I want to thank the Salvation Army Correctional and Justice Services for stepping up and agreeing to do that as well. So any of those organizations, if you want to provide anonymous feedback, you can go to them. And I'm hoping to keep adding to that list, and we should have a more fulsome update in March.
Great, so I guess a motion to receive that, so I guess moved by Ms. Toth and then seconded by Mayor Brown. And just before you head out, just put your hand up, all in favor, and it carries. Great, so I guess I had made a commitment now that since at the end of every meeting, we allocate 15 minutes for members of the public. And so what I'll do is I'll just ask for any member of the public, if they wish to address the board on board-related matters, they have that opportunity. And I'm not sure, IT, do our microphones work right now up there? Yep, and they'll work. So great. So I don't have an expectation for members to state their name or any their address as long as you're a Londoner. That's good to go. And expect that you're addressing the board and the board within their roles. So I guess this is you're the first person to ever speak to the board directly. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And you can adjust the microphone if it's helpful.
My name is David Ross. I've been reaching out to the London Police for about 5 years now. I've also been reaching out to the Chief of Police for 2 years. I've been assaulted in handcuffs. I've been called a mental case. And the police say they're here for the front lines. Well, when someone's being abused mentally and they're being locked up in a hospital for mental issues because they're not getting help because of the abuse, there's an issue, a big one. And I've been told that I'll be charged for calling his office, the Chief of Police's office. That's an issue. I'm calling because I need help, not to be told you'll go to jail. The members of this community deserve help from the law, not to be told, go away, move out of the city you grew up in. I grew up in this city. I was not born here, but I've lived here since the age of 1. And the London City Police has told me to move out of this city. They've told me to move far away instead of helping me. I am now up on 2 traffic offenses because I had an officer harass me, stalk me. I've also been told the OPP are harassing me too because a friend of mine's car was impounded because I was in the passenger seat. Because for 5 years I've been reaching out for help. Enough is enough. I'm not a drug addict. I'm not a criminal. I'm a citizen of this community. And I do ask that my police respects me. And I have not gotten it. And I please ask that this board right now calls in the ISU, because the service I have received is not right. I've been treated like a piece of crap in my community, where I do provide good services. You ask people in this community about me, and they're going to tell you I'm a good person. But you ask the London City Police, they're going to tell you I'm a mental case. I've been escorted out of the police station for help, told that I'm a meth head. Well, I hate to tell you folks, I'm here strong, trying to rebuild my life. I've lost everything I've owned. I've tried to report the crimes to the London Police because I live in London. That's what the OPP tell me. Yet the OPP say, we're not taking the report. You live in London. The London Police says the crime didn't happen in London. We're not taking the report. Where does a guy like me win? How do I get help? I even offered to give this man here a polygraph to prove I'm not a liar. And I did not get respect. Even to yesterday, I had his officer after 2 months call me and ask me what's going on. Yet I told his office 3 days ago, he's got till Tuesday to call me. Otherwise, I'm coming in here because I've had enough. Yet I had his officer call me yesterday to say what's going on. After 2 months of waiting, where's my help? Where's everybody in the community's help? Officers don't have the right to push people around and bully people. And I'm making that clear. And I will stand up for myself. And I'll stand up for anybody else I see being bullied by the London City Police or any other police department. Thank you, board, for your time today. I really appreciate you listening to me, because this is not right, how I've been treated. Thank you so much.
And thank you for your submission, and thank you for attending the meeting. So I'll look for around the chamber to see if there's any members of the public who'd like to speak to the board directly. Going once, going twice, and 3 times. So I'll look, the next meeting is stated for March 22nd, 2018. And I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Mayor Brown, seconded by Vanessa. All those in favor? And it carries. Thank you very much.